Wow. Okay. Everyone was like super ready for that. Didn't have to like, shout anybody down or anything. It's great. Hi, everybody. Just a little heads up. Olivia is out on vacation. So however not organized I usually appear to be, prepare for a new level of not having my act together. My name's Kevin Galligan. I run a little company called Touch Lab where we make mostly Android things. We're doing a lot of other things these days. While I'm talking about it, hell, we're hiring, of course. We need some pretty experienced folks on the Android side, and then earmuffs iOS side too. Sorry, just that's what's happening. So, welcome to the New York Android Developers Meetup. Woohoo! Yeah, this is great. This is probably meetup like 867. I don't know. We've been having this for a while now. 2011. Cool. I already covered we're hiring. Next meetup is April 19th at Vimeo. Blah, blah, blah. Food and pizza. We're very excited. Olivia had a lot of text in here. I want to thanks very much to our March sponsor, Facebook. Woohoo! You're currently at Facebook, and I hope you are aware of that. And Greg, who helped us out quite a bit getting this set up. So thanks to Greg. Woo! All right, and we have a sponsor welcome from Kong. Here we go. Cool.
Thank you. Thanks, Kevin, and welcome everyone to Facebook New York. Thank you. I'm Kang. I'm a software engineer from Instagram Call Client team. Instagram Call Client team develops the mobile infrastructure for Instagram, and we felt responsibility for the app's speed, quality, and developers' efficiency. About a year ago from now, a bunch of us moved from California all the way to New York to build the Call Client team for Instagram here. And right after that, I joined meetup in buttons, like in Meetup, and that's where I met Kevin and Olivia. It has been almost 1 year. Thanks to all the support we got from Droid community in New York, we expanded our team very quickly by 5x in last year, and we expect to keep that growth like this year. So besides mobile infrastructure, Instagram has a pretty big mobile presence in New York. We have product teams developing Feed, Explore. We also have, Facebook also has a lot of mobile infrastructure and product teams in New York. We develop pages, local and media, and also network infrastructure, all in New York. More importantly, all those teams are hiring, so if you're interested, please reach out to us. A lot of our coworkers are here in today's event as well. Please talk to us. Lastly, I want to thank Kevin, Greg, and all the speakers to put up this event. And also, I wish everyone will enjoy the food, the talk, the drinks, and have a fun night. Thank you.
Well, thank you. One quick thing I almost forgot. I want to do a shout out for our friends running DroidCon Boston. They had a special code that I intruded on your email inboxes with that expires tonight if you thought you wanted to go to that. What's that? Oh, there's a DC on DevCon. Yeah. I don't know. I'm supposed to be on a call with they're trying to do an East Coast thing. I don't know what's going on. There's also a Chicago thing going on. Those guys, cool. And then in July, there is another conference in Denver, and they're also cool folks. And then I have no info today, but I think we'll have some more info in the coming month or two about our event in New York. But it's almost certainly going to happen again. So if you were waiting for that, we should have some information soon. Okay, so first talk up, we have Tom. Tom is speaking about Realm, I believe. Yes. Okay, cool. So, Tom, here we go.
No? Is this one working? All right, cool. Thanks, Kevin, and thanks, Facebook, for having us all here. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the New York Android meetup. Thanks all for coming. These are always fun. It's a cool chance to kind of get together and talk about fun stuff. For a quick introduction, my name's Tom. I'm the lead Android engineer at Blue Apron. For anyone who hasn't heard of Blue Apron, we are a recipe delivery company. My job is to help make sure that we ship the best possible experience for our customers on Android. We don't have an Android app in the market yet, and my job is to, well, fix that. Before that, I worked at Google. I ran the Play Game Services team. So when Google Play Services needs an update and you're annoyed at it, you can partially blame me. All right, cool. So that's enough about me. Let's get to what we're actually here to talk about, Realm. So quick show of hands. Who has heard of Realm? Awesome. Who's actually tried to use Realm in their app before? Okay, cool. So some of you, correct me when I misspeak. When we started building our app at Blue Apron, we looked into a lot of different caching technologies, and we decided that we would go with Realm. It's pretty cool. So I wanted to give a quick introduction to it, talk about some of the stuff that's really good, some of the stuff that's, shall we say, not so good, and some of the ways that we kind of worked around that. All right, so what is Realm? Right, Realm is a mobile database. The Realm team went out and built a database system kind of designed for the mobile use case. Some of the cool things about it, it's cross-platform. They built it as a C++ library kind of wrapped by these language-specific wrappers. So they have some for Java, Swift, Objective-C, JavaScript. And of course, it's C++ itself, so you can use it directly. That's kind of neat if you've got an iOS team that you're working with. You can actually share the same data model if you wanted. Some pretty cool sharing there. Other things about it, it's not SQL-based. Internally, it's kind of based on the idea of using objects to represent your data model, which I know is a totally radical concept, right? When we were working on starting up our app at Blue Apron, we decided that, hey, this is 2017. I don't really want to be writing SQL statements anymore. These things suck. They suck to debug. They suck to write, right? So let's try something different. So let's go a little bit deeper into kind of like why we chose Realm. There's a couple of nice things that we really love about it. The simplicity, the speed, and the tooling support. So first of all, like any modern library on Android, right? It's super easy to add this to your project. If you're using Android Studio and Gradle, right? You just add a line of Gradle to the dependencies and then apply the plugin. Once you've done that, the next step is just to put something in your application class to configure Realm. You'll notice the giant to-do in the middle of the screen there. That's copied directly from our code base. That is hey, we're in the middle of developing, right? So we don't want to have to go write migrations every time we update our data model. Because our data model is changing basically every day, right? Writing migrations for that would suck. So this is kind of the analog of having a SQLite open helper with an on-upgrade method that just drops all your tables, right? So it's really cool that this was super easy to configure. We didn't have to do any work for it, right? So you've got Realm in your app now, right? Super cool. Let's talk about what's next. In order to make this actually useful, you have to start by defining your objects and how they relate to each other. So the standard Realm documentation walks through this with a bunch of examples about dogs and people. And I like dogs, but I work at Blue Apron, so we're going to make this about food, right? So let's imagine that we have an app that we're going to try to, build out to list recipes. I know it's a real stretch, right? But I love pizza. Who doesn't love pizza, right? So let's say we have a few recipes. And of course, these are actual Blue Apron recipes, so I can shill for Blue Apron here. This is the cauliflower pizza. We have a smoked mozzarella pizza, and something that is, well, not a pizza, but basically one, a broccoli stromboli. So now that we know our domain, we can start by defining our schema, right? So in SQLite, this would be where you'd start, writing your tables and your indexes and kind of all that stuff, right? In Realm, all you have to do is define the objects that you actually want to work with. Your data model is your objects. Well, what do recipes have, right? They have if my clicker would work, there we go, a unique identifier, which we annotate with a primary key. And that means that, hey, this is the thing that you use to do insert or update, exactly like declaring your column as your primary key in SQL. What other objects do we have in here? Well, we might have a name, and I apologize for the spacing on this. We have an image URL, a list of ingredients, and then the most important part of any recipe, the Boolean flag is pizza. After that, we now have an ingredient. An ingredient is also a super simple object, right? It just has a click, there we go. Primary key with an ID, right? And has a name. So that's all we've got for our data model for right now. So let's try to actually talk through what happened in Realm. So if I wanted to, there we go. If I wanted to actually look at let's find all of the pizzas that we have in our system, right? You do a query for the class recipe where is pizzas true, find all, and right now that's going to return 2, right? We have 2 pizzas in the system. So let's decide that the stromboli, it's basically a pizza. We just kind of folded it over, so we're going to call it a pizza now. So we open a transaction, we mark it as pizza, and then we commit that. And what's really neat about this is that because Realm objects, like Realm queries, are a live view of the data underneath, that list actually just changed size on us. We don't need to refetch it. It's already there. So as soon as you commit this transaction, pizzas has a size of 3. So what's neat about that is that you can use that in your UI, right? And if you've, say, sent some background thread off to fetch data from the server, and then it comes back and updates your database, the UI already has the data it needs. You can register a listener on when these things change to actually kind of get notified that, hey, something changed, re-render, or invalidate the views you need to. But if you don't need to do that, you can just actually be looking at it right now, and it's a live view of your database. So that reactive model we thought was really powerful. One of the other things that's been great for us is the tooling in Realm. There's this really cool tool they have called the Realm browser, which lets you actually pull data from your device and look at it, right? You can kind of go in and inspect, here's all the columns, here's all the tables, here's what's actually being put into my database, so I can actually see all this stuff live. Other neat thing, it's open source, right? Both the wrapper libraries and the C++ is all open source. So if you ever want to know how something's working, you just pop into the code and there you go. All right, so that's kind of the good parts, right? But if it was all good, I probably wouldn't be here talking about it. Everybody would just be using it. So let's talk about some of the drawbacks that we've run into with Realm. This one was nasty. By default, Realm doesn't support partial updates, and that's a really big deal for us. Excuse me. So let me explain a little bit further. So if you consider our recipe object, right, simple basic recipe object, let's say that we have an overview screen that shows a list of recipes with a detail screen that might show you a little bit more data about it, right? Standard master detail pattern. Let's say if our server works, right? We have 2 endpoints. We have recipes list, and we have recipes get, right? And the recipes list returns the list of recipes. Recipes get returns the detail about the recipe. Maybe that's for performance reasons on the server. One isn't cacheable, right? All that stuff. Let's kind of walk through the flow here, and we'll see how that goes. So if here's the recipes list endpoint, right? It returns the ID, the name, the image URL, the basics you would need to render a list of recipes. And then the get gives you the detail for a particular recipe with the ingredients and tells you whether it's pizza, right? All right, so if this were SQL, right, you could imagine that you would be calling recipes list, and you would get back, here's our overview of all the recipes, and you would slam it into the table, and that's what your database would look like, right? You'd have just that partial information. Now, if the user went in and clicked on each pizza, and then came back and clicked the next pizza, went back, clicked the next pizza, you could imagine that you would get back the is pizza and the ingredient ID, and then partially update those into your database, right? This is how SQLite works. If you have content values, you don't touch the columns that aren't explicitly in the content values. Unfortunately, with Realm, if you did this, what would actually happen would be something like this, right? When you came back, you would have lost all of your initial information about the recipes. And why does that happen? Because in Realm, you work with Java objects, right? So when you create a new Java object, Realm can't tell that that field was null because it was set to null by default. It only knows it was null, right? So it goes, okay, that field's null. Clear it out in the database, right? That's a big problem. So if your server API isn't designed this way and you don't need partial updates, you might be fine, right? Like this may not burn you. For us, this was a major problem. I'll talk a little bit more later in the talk about how we got around it, but it's something to be aware of if you're considering using Realm. One of the other things about Realm, Realm is opinionated about threads. And the way they work, Realm objects can't be passed between threads. They are only valid on the thread where the Realm was opened, right? So if you have a background thread and you update some Realm object, you can't just pass that to your UI. It really sounds worse than it is. It's not actually all that complicated. What Realm recommends is that you open a new Realm per thread that you're working with and just do another query on that thread to grab the object. It takes a little bit to get your brain around it, right? It's a very different model than kind of a standard update the database, pass back my results. But once you get your brain around it, it works pretty well. It definitely does take some getting used to. You will have a couple of crashes because of this, right? Like in your activity, you will forget that, hey, I closed that Realm instance, and then therefore I can't use that thing anymore. You just need to think about it like a cursor, right? It's exactly like a cursor. If you have a cursor and you close the database connection out from under it, and then try to read data out of the cursor, it ain't gonna work, right? You're gonna have a bad time. Once you kind of get that into your brain and think about it exactly as if it was a cursor, a lot of these problems kind of go away. They have a really great in-depth walkthrough on their website that goes into exactly how their threading works and why it works this way and what's going on under the hood. It's a really cool read. I highly recommend it if you're interested in this kind of stuff. Testing, right? We write a lot of unit tests at Blue Apron, and I assume as good Android developers, all of you do too, right? Lots and lots of unit tests. The problem with Realm that we had is that the core classes, Realm, Realm query, Realm results, right? Like the core classes you actually need are final. And unfortunately, that means you can't mock them. Okay, sure, you could use power mock and dig into the class loader and muck with things, but that's just ugly. And depending on your stack, that may or may not work, right? If you're trying to use power mock and roboelectric, like just all kinds of bad shit's gonna happen. Don't recommend it. So that was a real pain in the ass for us. We had to work very hard to get around that. Realm also has an in-memory mode, which we thought would work perfectly for unit tests. Turns out not so much. The real problem with this is kind of like why this is an issue for us is actually our next topic. Realm uses native code. As I said, right, it's a Java wrapper around a C++ library. So what's that mean? It means that there's a native library under the hood baked into your APK. So by default, it just builds the universal library, right? And it actually bundles all 5 ABIs into your APK. That means it adds about 5 megs when you actually only really need 1 meg of that. The other problem with native code is that if it ever crashes, debugging native code crashes is really, really hard, right? Like it's just much harder because you don't have all the same information that you have in a Java crash. Fortunately for us, that's mostly theoretical. I haven't yet had a Realm crash in native code ever, so fingers crossed. Hopefully it'll stay that way. But because of the native code, it means that when you're running a unit test, right, in the JVM on your machine, it can't load that library, and so everything blows up. So that's why the in-memory Realm doesn't work. The Realm team's actually working on this. They're working on figuring out a way to support running their native code in a JVM on platforms that are not Android. But obviously that's a hard problem for them, and they'll get there at some point. But all right, so we've talked a little bit about how we dealt with Realm at Blue Apron. I'll talk about like kind of how we actually did some of these things to overcome these limitations. So first thing, right, ABI Split. Basically, if you have native code, you should strongly consider shipping multiple APKs for architecture. Really trivial, right? You just add some. It looks more complicated than it is, but you can find endless articles online teaching you exactly how to do this. The biggest complication with this is actually the release process, right? And making sure that you actually upload the right APKs all the time, because now you have 5 APKs instead of 1. Just kind of keeping track of all that can be a little tricky. Again, it only saves you a couple of megs, but a couple of megs to your users is a big deal, right? So yeah, this is why I actually gave this talk, just so I could have this slide. One thing that we struggled with a lot was making Realm testable. So we decided that we would wrap some of our classes here using Aperture Science puns so that we could actually test our stuff. So first, we had something that we called the Realm Gate. This is, you could basically call it the Realm Factory, but Realm Gate is more fun. Basically, it just kind of wraps up where we obtain a realm from. And this lets us, in our tests, mock this class instead of Realm itself, right? The next thing we have is the portal. The portal wraps around Realm, and all of our code works with portals, not with realms. Therefore, in our tests, we just mock portals, right? Similarly, there's the portal query. The portal query is exactly what you might think. It's a Realm query, just wrapped, right? I didn't even bother writing it because it's 3 lines of code, but it's super critical code. Wrapping the classes up like this made it so we could actually write unit tests again, and suddenly our life got a lot better. Now, this is where things get fun. You know how I said that Realm doesn't support partial updates? So this is what we had to do to work around it. It's convoluted and a little bit messy, but it does the job. So the first thing we have is a JSON response from our server, right? It sends us down a blob of what we'll call network format JSON. Next, we grab that using retrofit, right? We use Moshi, and we parse that into a Java object, right? So far, so good. This is all pretty standard stuff. Once we have this network model, right? This network model is a POJO, and it represents the data from our server. We then run it through something that we called the model converter. We actually wrote an annotation processor to kind of generate this. Basically, it takes the POJO from the network model and turns it into client format JSON, right? It just does a little converter, outputs a JSON representation. And then Realm has this cool functionality of create or update from JSON. So Realm can actually take the JSON object that we give it, parse that, and turn those into Realm objects. And that gets around that kind of core limitation that it doesn't know if the field was null because it was set to null, or if it was null because it was supposed to be default, right? In JSON, you just omit the fields that are default and not touched. So this is a little bit complicated, right? We go from JSON to Java to JSON to Java. It's one of those things where when we designed this, the engineer in me just kind of cringed, right? It feels so awful. But it does the job. It seems more complicated than it is in practice, and it actually has some nice benefits. This kind of isolation here actually makes it so that if our server changes what the network model looks like, we don't have to change the client, right? We can basically just update the network models. The client models can stay the same, even if we're getting the data from now different sources. So it ended up kind of helping us out a bit, but it was definitely tricky. Yeah, I keep pushing on the Realm team to try to see if they can bake some of this into Realm itself. So far, that hasn't gone very far. So what's interesting, though, is that since I wrote the first version of these slides, Realm released 3.0. So when I wrote these slides, I was on Realm 2.3. And this was, I think, 2 weeks ago that they released 3.0. 3.0 actually has some big fixes in it, right? So shout out to the Realm team for actually listening to their community, right? They have been incredibly responsive. They're actually fixing issues that people are having with the SDK in the wild. So I wanted to give a quick talk about like what actually changed in 3.0 and how that addresses some of my pain points here. So a couple of new things that are in 3.0. First, the core classes are non-final. Yay, finally, we can mock them. So that actually allowed us to get rid of portal query, right? So portal query didn't make it onto the slides, which is a good thing because now it's gone. We ended up keeping portal. Portal had some other utility for us. It let us wrap up some like common functions, into helpers. So we ended up just keeping portal, but theoretically we could have gotten rid of it, which was nice. One of the other annoyances about Realm is the notification model. So remember how I mentioned that the Realm queries are live views, right? Like they update automatically. You register for a listener. when something changes in the background, and then you get notified and you get told, hey, this thing's updated, but it's already updated, right? The data is already live. So if you're trying to do something cool like recycler view, right, like where you say, hey, invalidate only a range, you can't because all of your data is gone, right? You only know the new data. You don't know the old data anymore, unless you cached it, at which point you're kind of defeating the whole purpose of Realm, right? So what they've added in 3.0 is they've added the ability to register for fine-grained notifications. So you can actually get notified this item changed or that item changed. And then from there you can dispatch to recycler view and actually only invalidate the parts that you need to. Much nicer. It lets you do kind of like the cool fancy animations, all that stuff. They fixed a bunch of like minor bugs, right? Like really great. And of course they made some breaking changes because it wouldn't be a major release without making breaking changes, right? The one that they broke was pretty subtle, but very annoying if you get bit by it. Realm results are now live. So what does that mean? If you're iterating in a for loop over Realm results and changing the values inside them, it used to be that you would open a transaction, update your values, and then commit the transaction, and that's when they would be applied. Now, they're actually applied live. So the Realm results will change live. So for example, if we were iterating over our list of recipes and changing, we got a query for is pizza, and we changed the is pizza value to false while we were iterating over that, it would be updating live, and therefore we would end up skipping indexes. Subtle, but very annoying. If you're using an iterator, that actually doesn't matter because on an iterator, they make a snapshot and freeze the collection. Fortunately for us, most of our code was using iterators, so it was pretty safe, but definitely a big gotcha if you're not aware of it. All right, that's pretty much it. Thank you all for listening, and hopefully you found this useful. If you want, there's more content from our mobile engineering team on our blog. I put up a link here, and yeah, that's it. And I think we have a little time for Q&A, but.
I guess there's more benefits if you're starting a current assignment.
It's on.
Hey, so I can understand if you're starting a new project, Realm might provide some benefits between iOS. Like you said, you can create one database and deploy it on both platforms. Is there any benefit if you have an existing project to switch over?
That's a great question. It's hard to say, right? I think it depends a lot on your use cases and kind of what your data looks like. I will say that I've been pretty impressed with Realm's performance so far, right? So Realm is incredibly fast to update, fast to read, and fast to query. I don't have any good benchmarks on that, though, because I didn't build a SQL system, right? I didn't build out my full data model in SQL and then port it over to Realm and compare. So I can't be like, oh, you'll see, 30% improvements, right? So I think it's a hard sell, right?
Gotcha. Just to follow up on that, what kind of data set are we looking for where we're going to see great performance increase? Like if you're dealing with 1,000 rows, does it really make a difference between providers?
Right. Again, I think that's a great question. I unfortunately can't answer that. Like I don't actually know.
I can. Great.
So I gave a talk about this, and I became like the anti-Realm guy for a while, but people misunderstood. Like I was against their marketing, not against their tech. They doing just straight inserts and updates over full objects. It was kind of comparable with some of the faster SQL stuff, but there are a few things that you have to keep in mind. Like you're not always reading all of your object modeling because it's reading directly off the thing. If you get an object and there's 8 fields and you're only reading 2, it's proportionally faster. Stuff like that. And if you just drink the Kool-Aid and stop worrying about threads, then the fetching like associated objects thing is much simpler and safer. So it's actually like really interesting tech from that perspective. But it's not like, what I didn't like about their marketing was like, oh, it's like so much faster than all these things, and I'm like, well, not really. They didn't publish their benchmark until like I got to argument with them. But it was interesting anyway. But it's definitely for like day-to-day stuff. It makes more sense than a lot of the ORMs in Android, and most of them are bad. And that's coming from someone who's written one. So
Thank you, guys.
And I think the other thing there is it also depends on how complicated your SQL is to maintain, right? Like if your SQL queries are the kinds of things that people have to dig out their reference books every time they want to go in and touch them, you may see more benefits once you can replace that.
Well,
right?
another advantage I know that's out of the box, sorry guys, with Realm there is encryption out of the box, right? You can get AES 256 out of the box. Yep. In our project we are using ORM Lite with, I guess, a SQL cipher added on top. So at least it provides it out of the box. But even in what you were saying, if we're not generally using SQL queries directly, it's probably going to be negligible. Okay.
I wouldn't necessarily upgrade from or rip everything out and be like, you have to replace it with Realm, right?
Got it.
But definitely if you're starting something new, it's worth considering.
Got it. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, back to your data model where you had recipes and ingredients and you had a list of ingredients. I thought internally to a Realm object, you had to use a Realm list, which is a separate kind of. Is that still true?
Yep. That's true. I just sort of relied that for the slides.
Okay.
But yeah, instead of using a list, you use I think it's called a Realm. I don't remember the exact
Realm
name
list.
anymore. Yeah, I think it's a Realm list, and that encapsulates the relationship.
Right.
But it extends list so that you can actually use it as a list if you want.
I was hoping maybe 3.0 got rid of that. But
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay. Thanks.
I actually had another question about the list of ingredients, or rather about sub-objects in an object. About 2 months ago, I stopped working on an app where we depended completely on Realm, and our biggest problem was orphan objects. So say you remove your pizza from the database, it doesn't automatically remove the pepperoni, cheese, and say peppers from the database.
Yep.
So if nothing else uses those, then they're there with no pointers to them. And we wrote, I think, 3 times before I quit, a cleanup algorithm for this database. And it was becoming so bad, it was sort of a toss-up whether we would have gone with it again. I'm wondering if you've dealt with this and if anything happened in the last 2 months to improve it.
Nothing's happened in the last 2 months to improve it that I'm aware of. So far, that hasn't been a big problem for us. But it is definitely a problem with the way Realm works, right? If you have these top-level objects and you delete them, it doesn't go through and delete, the sub-objects. The advice that I got from the Realm team about that was that you're supposed to delete the sub-objects yourself first, right? So when you write the code that deletes the object, you go, okay, great, find me all of your sub-objects, delete those, and then you can delete the top-level object, right?
I've gotten the same advice, but it's very difficult when you have, say, 12 pizzas.
Right.
Every one of them is going to have cheese on it.
Right. And you don't want to delete.
So you don't want to delete.
Right. You don't want to delete
cheese
the
off of all
shared
your
objects.
pizzas when you take away one.
Yeah. That does get tricky.
I guess you don't have a magic bullet, is what you're saying.
Yeah. I wish I did. Unfortunately, that's not something we've dealt with yet, so I don't have any great answers there.
Okay. Thanks.
Use the mic real quick.
Is there a way to run a query that sort of pierces the object model and just, give me all the objects of type this, or can you only walk down from the top?
Sorry, I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, I mean, what she was saying about having orphan sub-objects, is there a way you can just say to the database, give me all the objects of a given type, or can you only find things by going down from the top?
You can find for any type you want. So if in our example, we could have queried for all the ingredients, right? I don't need to go through recipes to find the ingredients.
Okay, so something, I mean, conceptually, you could do Java reference counting again or something,
Sure.
build a garbage collector
Yep.
if you felt you had to, but it would be ugly.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, you could definitely go through and keep track of your references, right? Again, whether you want to build that or not, who knows? But
this might be a pretty intro question. I've never used Realm, but on one of your slides, when you had the query, you had the name of the field on the object as a string.
Yep.
Is that a requirement? And how do you protect against refactors, and how does it integrate with refactor tools?
that is a great question. Yes, that is a requirement. You pass in the field names by string. Something that I just wrote today to help us protect that is an annotation processor that just generates a contract, and then we can use the contract fields everywhere we would use the field name instead.
Because I was going to ask, how do you make it work with ProGuard? Do you have to exclude all of your models from?
Yeah, you would either have to exclude all of your models from ProGuard, or you would have to use the string names, right?
Yeah. Cool, thanks.
But yeah, something that can generate the contract so that you don't have to use the raw string names is much safer. Otherwise, refactoring tools just don't work. And if you want to rename a field, you're screwed. All right, well, thank you guys very much.
All right, just a quick announcement. I had to dig and had a question about the code for Boston in case you were interested. It is ny-android, but again, I did flood all of your email inboxes with it, so it's also there too. Cool. So now we have Jason up, and I don't know exactly what you're talking about. It was big architecture, I think. Okay, good. Cool.
Thanks. So I'm Jason. I've been at Facebook for 4.5 years. And this talk is about changing large software systems in place. You could think of large software systems as these mountains of product code built on top of layers of infrastructure code. And changing the infrastructure underneath is what I've been working on for the past few years. My team works on keeping Newsfeed's infrastructure up to date, so a bunch of the work we do is directly related to this subject. One example is Omer, who's sitting right there. He's talked at DroidCon a few years ago about how we rewrote the story rendering infrastructure, also for Newsfeed and all the other feeds in the app, to improve the performance, thank you, to improve the performance and have more testable and manageable UI code. Another example of this kind of work from our team is Benjamin talking at DroidCon this year about how we moved all the feeds in the app from list view to recycler view. And he gave a bunch of pro tips about how you could do this, make the same transition. And now I'm going to be talking a bit about the journey of how we are rewriting the story rendering infrastructure one more time. Everyone's worked on a project and thought to themselves, should we rewrite this, right? Should we rewrite this network API? Should we rewrite this screen? Or should we even rewrite the entire app? I hope this talk can help you answer that question and give you a little bit of guidance to make the process completed safely next time you're thinking about that. So the first step of the process isn't actually technical. You should probably start by answering the question, why should we work on this, right? This kind of work is really hard. It takes a lot of time, and you should be focusing on something that's impactful for your team, right? So if you can't actually justify the work of doing this, if you can't justify the amount of time you're going to spend rewriting your app, then it doesn't deserve doing. I really like this one feature in Scala is not a great reason to rewrite your entire app. At this step, you should be able to describe the value you are going to provide and the problem that this work is going to solve. In the Facebook app, we have a ton of stories. And there's an enormous amount of code to render these stories that you see all across the entire app. There are hundreds of developers every month committing code to change the way that these stories behave, adding features, changing functionality, etc. So these stories keep getting more and more complex. Rendering them gets more and more expensive. And also, there's an enormous amount of user time spent on screens with these exact stories on them. They're all over the app, right? So we needed a solution that was going to grow to the complexity of story rendering. And we needed to change this heavily used infrastructure all over the app without users or developers noticing. Then Lucas Roca told us he was going to make a UI rendering framework that solves exactly this problem. It's got background thread layout. It's got fine-grained view recycling that you don't have to even think about. And he recently posted about it on the Facebook engineering blog. The post is titled, Components for Android, a declarative framework for efficient UIs. Not only would it fix our problem, but it also had a bunch of really nice stuff to make the developer experience for Facebook engineers specifically a lot better. So the why for adopting components in our app was really compelling. Once you've nailed down why you want to change the app in this major way, where do you start? Up until now, you've only explained why you might want to go about doing this, right? Your next step is to prove that doing this work is going to have the outcome that you expect. Maybe background thread layout is not going to fix all the UI stuttering in your app. Maybe fine-grained view recycling is overrated. And maybe there aren't a ton of people who are going to ride that new subway line. Does anyone recognize this? Yeah, lots of. So for those of you who don't, this is the Second Ave subway line. It just opened on January 1st. And just like us, they started with the same process, right? Why do you want to build this thing? They go discuss the values, they do some research, they find out there's a good reason to do this. And then they have to go and prove that this is actually true, that all these riders are going to be riding their new subway line. But they didn't want to jump in, spend all this time and all this money building out an entire new subway line if it wasn't going to be used as heavily as they originally expected. So what do? They split it out into phases. And actually, phase 1 is what opened on January 1st this year. One interesting characteristic I just want to point out about this, phase 1's actually relatively small compared to all the other phases. And part of that is because at first, you want to make as small of a change as possible to prove that all the rest of the work is worth doing. All right, so why should you make this change incrementally? Why should you split it into several phases? Well, I just gave one reason, but there are a few milestones that I like to think about that are important for any time you want to make one of these large rewrites happen. Each milestone should give you some pretty important information about the process, about the conversion, about the success of the project. And each step of the way, you should minimize the amount of work you have to do to answer the next critical question about the project. So this incremental approach also helps you out to understand how to change this huge software system piece by piece, because it forces you to think about how to just make smaller changes to the system. Every time I've done this, I've thought about phase 1 as just proving your expectations, like I said before. And how do you do that? I recommend starting with something that's relatively easy to move to your new infrastructure and something that's relatively hard to move to your new infrastructure. In our case, we converted the stories text and the stories header. So just if someone writes some content on their post, you see that text, or the header, which is like all the stuff you see on every post. By making these first couple changes towards your goal, you'll have the opportunity to prove that the change is as valuable as you're expecting it to be by just making a few small changes. And also, you're going to learn a huge amount about the mountain of work that's ahead of you that you weren't able to expect without starting. So here's some examples of some of the problems we initially ran into when we started doing these conversions. Like I said, we started with the stories text. As you can see, the text is just totally running off the screen. This happened when we were trying to convert the stories text to components, which is a different UI rendering framework. So you could tell, like, this is a really simple piece of the app, and it still was screwed up on the first step. And that's just going to happen. Easy things are going to go wrong. But the header is a lot more complicated, and that was just a shit show. So the early days had a ton of Flexbox bugs, and we worked through them, but it was pretty brutal. So what did we get out of this? Well, we found a ton of optimizations. Right, the whole purpose for this project is performance, so we found a lot of opportunities there before we set out and rewrote the whole app. We also found a ton of missing features we were going to need to get the rest of the app onto this framework that we didn't expect. And finally, the bugs, lots of bugs. We proved that we could get the value we expected out of the rewrite without investing a whole bunch of time into it. Right, so the next step. Now it's time to estimate the cost. In most cases, for us in this room, the question is really like, how long is this project going to take? How long is it going to take to rewrite the app? But now you've overcome some of the more frequent obstacles. You've hacked your way around a bunch of other ones because you're really just trying to prove things at this point. And you've gained enough foresight to know some of the challenges that are going to be in your way. Be honest about the fact that you don't know everything yet. There's still plenty of unknowns, and you're only going to be able to estimate some of the cost of this project. You don't know some of the things that you don't know yet. Oh, this is another excerpt from the Second Ave Subway Wikipedia page. Let me read it to you. The entire line from Water Street to 180th Street in the Bronx was expected to be completed by 1980. So, I guess this just opened 2 months ago, and actually just phase 1 opened 2 months ago. So this just kind of goes to show you, like, any of these like large infrastructural projects that you're going to take on, it's not exactly related, but you're going to get it wrong. There's just things you can't predict. And you might even get it wrong actually a few times. This is the table of contents from the Second Ave subway line. And if you look real at the top to when this started, it was in 1919 that they started planning the Second Ave subway, which was almost 100 years ago. So if you were off in your estimation by like 2 or 3x, would the project still be worth doing? If not, you might want to just cancel it because it will probably take 2 or 3 times as long as you expect. When we had to make our decision at this step in the game, we had hundreds of views that could be rendered in stories. They're extremely complex. We knew this was not going to be some 1-month project. It was going to take a lot of time to rewrite all this stuff. All right, so eventually you've proven that this new direction is worth going in. You've figured out the cost, you've figured out the value, and the math is adding up. This is the point where you want to just start kicking off migrations to your new infrastructure in earnest. And at this point, I usually like to bring in someone that I can trust and someone that trusts me, and we have some sort of mutual respect as a partner. This, up until this point, you could be the only person that's actually seen any of this new infrastructural code, the only person that's interacted with it at all. You are completely unaware of some of its shortfalls, and there's just still a ton of problems that are left before you can get to the end. This is still super early in the process, and there's a ton of risk. You're going to be partnering with someone who has to be really comfortable with just rolling with the rough edges of the project and being committed to actually taking it across the finish line. My team, in this case, was the first adopter of components. We did not build the components framework, we adopted it in the stories infrastructure. And the first conversions were hard. You saw the pictures. It was rough. There were bugs everywhere, and we identified a ton ourselves. We fixed some of them ourselves, but sometimes we were completely blocked from making any progress at all because of some of the severe bugs that we found during the migration process. So just goes to show you, you have to have a really strong relationship with whoever you're partnering with at this step, if you're going to be partnering with anyone, because they have to put up with a lot, and there's a really high cost to being that first partner. The next phase in the project that I notice kind of a big change is what I like to call the new normal. This is where your change, your new infrastructure is starting to take over the entire app, and all of the features that are necessary to convert anything else that remains in the app, they're ready to go. They all exist in your new infrastructure, so you could just take on any surface you want to migrate. The most valuable way I find to help keep the progress going forwards towards the goal is by setting a rule. There's no new content that's being built on the old infrastructure anymore. And you have to be really vigilant about this. Even if there's a really tight deadline, make it work on the new infra. Work with whoever it is that really needs to get their feature out the door quickly. and just make sure that they can build it with the new stuff. There's a bunch of reasons for this. One, it's easy for all the people working around you to just not have to think about this big change you're making in the app. And they've got a deadline. They're really comfortable with the old infrastructure they've been working with for a while, right? And it's your job to introduce them to the new stuff, and also to get them comfortable working with the new stuff, and making sure that the new infrastructure you're introducing into the app can handle all the problems that you're trying to solve in the app. And also, it's in your best interest to make sure that everyone's building on new infrastructure, because at some point, you want to be able to stop supporting the old infrastructure, right? You want to put all of your focus on this rewrite that you're doing. So finally, everything in the app is running on your new shiny infrastructure, right? But you're not done yet. You have some cleanup to do. Why do you have to do this cleanup? Because when you build products, you really want to have a pretty simple API that you can work with. And if there's all this buildup, all this cruft of API changes and special features that were necessary during the migration process but aren't necessary after the migration process, it's your job to go and clean that up and make sure that all these products can be built as quickly as possible on the new infrastructure. That's why you made the change, right? You wanted things to be better. Also, when you were making all these changes to get to the new infrastructure, you did a bunch of hacky stuff, and you don't want to see people copying and pasting that crap all over the place, right? So go clean up. So this is really the general outline that I like to follow when I do any of these large architectural rewrites. Start with why, prove your expectations, estimate the cost, scale adoption, the new normal, and then clean up. But before I go, I just wanted to give you a few tips about how to go about each step of the process. Every step of the way, I recommend starting by building a wedge. And what do I mean here? Well, you want to minimize the surface area of the code base that cares about the change that you're making. Right? This should be a single point in the code base, ideally, that forks between the old behavior and the new behavior. And you might have to do plenty of refactoring before you can get to this step. But in Java terms, this is usually just an interface that both the old stuff and the new stuff implement. As an example, think about how a story looks, right? At the top of the story, there's always the header that has like the avatar, the profile picture, the name of the person, the timestamp, et cetera. That's the header. And the story knows that it needs to render a header. It doesn't really matter how it does that. It calls header.render or something like that. And the header knows that it has to draw something on the screen. It doesn't care whether it's mounting a component or drawing a view. This is the kind of interface I'm talking about, where you just have one place in the code that cares about the difference between the old infrastructure and the new infrastructure. Similarly, if you're rewriting your entire app, there should still be some way to carry out the same basic expectations in some interface. Another tip, don't mistake motion for progress. I see this happen frequently where people are writing plenty of code, diffs are flying by, changes are happening, but they're not actually getting closer to the goal every step of the way. And so something that I like to do is every step of the way I just think, how is this next step that I'm taking, how is that getting me closer to the goal, to the finish line of completely eliminating the old infrastructure? On the other hand, excessive rigidity is brittle. If you know that you can complete the entire project in just a few steps, but there's also all this other stuff happening, different projects going on in flight at the same time, and they're going to get in the way of you making it to the finish line, you have to acknowledge that those projects exist. You can't ignore them. There are walls that are technical and non-technical that will get in your way during this process, and you have to acknowledge them and work through them. And there's something on the screen. Well, I will tell you about what the next slide is like. In summary, the approach that I like to take, you can summarize it as constant reevaluation and fast failures. Every step of the way, after you've taken that step, you've made progress towards the goal. Your next job is to stop, reevaluate the environment, and then plan the next step. That's the talk. Thanks, everyone. If you've got questions about this kind of stuff, rewriting architecture or components or anything Android, feel free to find me after or ask questions now. Hello.
Just had a small question about finding the critical segment to work on to prove to yourself. It's kind of counterintuitive, don't you think? Like, how do you find the critical step, like the critical segment, without knowing what it's going to cost for the entire thing and breaking it down?
You're saying, how do you determine what
Yeah.
the first phase is?
Yeah.
Yeah, so when you're taking on this rewrite, you want to replace some piece of infrastructure with a new thing. And usually, you can see there are some simple users of this interface. The stories example is text, but imagine a surface. There are complex surfaces in your app, and then there are simple surfaces. If you want to migrate away from fragments onto like Mortar and Flow or whatever, like any other implementation, you want to pick something that's, I recommend starting with something that's relatively simple. So maybe your About page. And then something that's more complex. So maybe not start with the main screen, but something that has a bit more meat to it. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
You mentioned something, or rather, the last step about cleanup. I was thinking about what you were talking about when you were saying doing things like making things more testable or making things like that people would copy around to other parts of the code base who are new to what you were creating. During your process, are you thinking about all 5 steps all throughout it, so that by the time you get further on, it's not just this giant other infrastructure project of just like cleaning up, so that it's a little bit easier to integrate the rest of the team and like make the new normal easier? Like, it seems like each could become its own infrastructure project.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's actually a great point. So you can, some of these like big infrastructural changes you want to make, you might not want to take them all the way. You might find that you're halfway through the project and you've actually accomplished the goal that you want to, and you're happy with the state that it's in, and then that could be the end state. And you should always be thinking about where is the end state. That's part of like the constant reevaluation. So yeah, all of these phases, some of them reappear. Like you constantly want to be thinking about, have I found out something that changes my expected cost? Or did some of the expected value not really pan out the way I thought it was going to? So yeah, all these phases are kind of constantly happening, and definitely you should be cleaning up along the way. You shouldn't just save it all till the end, but yeah.
Hi, I'm Dioni. Thank you for the talk. I'm interested to understand in your challenge on, well, how would describe your challenges on when you were working on the new infrastructure. How did you onboard the team to, hey, start working with the new stuff? How was that experience?
Yeah, so before we started the project, we were pretty on board with taking it on. Like the team in general was pretty interested in components. There's a lot of good reasons for it, like I stated, and our team knows what our goals are. So everyone was pretty on board with it. We started by just the first few weeks or months were pretty heavily involved with the team that built the infrastructure that we wanted to adopt. So they're out in London. We flew out to London, spent a week with them. They flew back here, spent a week with us, and over the first few months, there was just constant contact with them. And then as time went on, it became less frequent. Are you talking, like, what do you want to dive into any specific part of this?
No, so basically, I mean, I'm thinking, okay, we need to rewrite this. You guys made the decision. We need to write this, and you answered why. So I'm thinking, okay, so you needed to buy into the team to be like, okay, we're gonna go this way to rewrite this infrastructure. Was there any like objections? No, we shouldn't do this because.
Yeah.
And you know, how did you get everybody to buy in? Hey, we're gonna need to go this route.
Great question. Yeah. So there was definitely pushback. Not everyone was bought in entirely, especially in the beginning. Everyone knew this was a risky project. Everyone knew it was going to take a lot of time. And we already had a solution that was working okay. It was having some issues, but it was working okay. And we could have probably migrated that thing to something that worked better for us with some amount of effort as well, right? So the sell was really like, what is this buying us that we won't have to worry about later? And really the sell for components for us was the background thread layout is such a powerful capability for really complex surfaces, scrolling surfaces, that it was really going to solve problems that no other framework has been able to solve for us yet. So everyone kind of bought into that piece at least. And then we went out to actually test it out, try the first few out, prove that it's actually worth it, and then more people bought in.
Thank you.
Hey, I guess when you finish your estimate, were you the final decision maker, or did you have to pass this information along to get approval?
Facebook is kind of weird. We don't really have any like final decision makers. It's a lot of people get engineers get a lot of opportunity to choose the projects that they're working on,
right,
to some extent. So I was a hard seller. I was the hardest seller. I really believed in it, and I convinced a lot of people that it was worth doing. I helped set up the path forward.
Did you have anybody assist you with any of the estimation?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you kind of brought the group together and put all the heads together in a room and tried to iron everything out?
Not just me, but I was part of it, yes.
Right. Okay, thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Cool. So, if you're here for content, that is definitely it. So we move on to the next phase of the evening. See you at the next meetup, which is that Vimeo? Yes, I think. Cool. April 19th. Thanks again very much to Facebook. Always fantastic support of the community. Greg and Kira helped quite a bit. So let's say thanks to them. Come on. Thanks for little DroidCon shout-outs. I like the screenshots. It's good. It's always helpful. It's definitely happening this year. We just don't know when. Cool. And most importantly, obviously, the after party at Central Bar, which is a block from here. So we're going to go check that out. But that's it for this installment of the meetup. So. Oh, and pick up your stuff, please, if you've got garbage.
Could be nice for one night, but then you wanna take control, and I would rather fly so low. The Snow White, she did right.